You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We're going to introduce our guest, and we have Ashley McGuire. And first of all, it's a pleasure to have you on the Final Say Radio Show. And please give us a little bit of background, one about the organization there, because we're not all that familiar, but what exactly is Acculturated doing?
Hey, so Acculturated is a website where people write about the intersection of pop culture and sort of more profound issues like the virtues, something that I think that the left does a lot of, but we do it from more of a conservative point of view.
Okay. So, you guys are all digital?
Correct.
Okay. And now you have a group of people who go on various shows like ours and TV networks and promote the different stories that you're working on?
Yeah, that's something that they've just started to do. I write for the site. I'm not one of the editors, but I think there's about 10 of us who are on staff as writers, and then a lot of just contributors as well.
Okay, well, great. And I think it's a very interesting, I was reading your article here, and the real sexual double standard. And first of all, you reminded me of a few things, new and old. But if we can, let's go look at the Sandra Fluke issue. And what was amazing about that, and it tied important court cases actually. And we can't stop talking about Obamacare, but one of the pieces of that is the forcing somebody to go against their religious standards and things of that nature. But of course, forcing Americans to have to pay for somebody else's birth control, and you point out Rush Limbaugh called her out, but the president celebrates her and makes her into an international hero, if you will. And it's just amazing the treatment of both sides. And so I'll let you comment on some of that.
Yeah, no. So what prompted me to write the article was seeing an SNL skit of Michelle Bachmann being portrayed by Miley Cyrus in a mock skit where she was portrayed in a completely sexually degraded way. And in my view, what they did to her is just as bad as what Rush Limbaugh did to Sandra Fluke, which was unfair. I think he could have criticized what she was arguing for, as you just did, without resorting to calling her sexually inappropriate names. But what I talk about is the fact that when someone on the right does that to someone on the left, there's this huge media outcry that we don't stop hearing about for months, but it's like a tree falling in the woods. Nobody hears about it. If somebody from the left does it to the right, or just in general if somebody on the right is mocked. And really I'm saying somebody, but what I'm talking about are women.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely right. And now I have to say I have met Congresswoman Bachmann numerous times. In fact, when she was during the presidential campaign where she was in there briefly, we actually sat in her box at one of the debates. And I happen to think that, whether you like her or not, she's definitely an incredibly decent woman. She's brought so many different foster children into her home and has dedicated a large part of her life to helping children who are unfortunate. And so the attacks that she came under, especially being a woman, for her stance on some of these issues is really incredible. And I agree with you. Rush was over the top with his treatment of Sandra. But the whole issue, because as I said, the issue comes down to, forcing people to go against their individual beliefs, and that's what our government did there.
Oh, yeah, no, and they're continuing to do it. I mean, this is actually a topic that I write about quite a bit, the HHS mandate, and it's amazing the fact that the government is not backing down in any way. In fact, the Supreme Court is getting ready to hear, 2 petitions for cert have been filed with the Supreme Court related to this case, one on behalf of Hobby Lobby, the other on behalf of a Mennonite family-owned company. I think it's a timber company. It is pretty incredible what the government's doing, enforcing. I mean, the latest lawsuit filed was by a group of nuns, a class action lawsuit on behalf of the Little Sisters of the Poor, who are arguing that they can't violate their Catholic faith and pay for things like abortifacient drugs. So it is truly amazing, and it was very deceptive the way Sandra Fluke tried to argue that it was a women's issue when, that latest lawsuit right there embodies the fact that, nope, sorry, there's a lot of women who don't agree with the mandate and who do believe that religious liberty is important.
Right. Now, here's a question for you, because there are obviously women who are serving in the House and the Senate on both sides of the aisle who are and then within the administration. We haven't had a female president yet, but we've had people consider running. We've had people run for vice president who are women. But when you look at it, it seems to me like you have Nancy Pelosi, who was the Speaker of the House at one point. Now she's the leader on the the minority leader. But why is it that there's constantly an attack on Republican women who serve in Congress, but not the same? And I'm meaning from the general media. It seems to, and I'm not talking about, like we're more of a conservative show. Rush Limbaugh, you know where he stands. And these are just radio shows that aren't fair and balanced. We are what we are. But when you're a main network, when you're CNN or MSNBC or Fox or any of these, then you should just be talking about the facts and the issues, not attacking one side or the other based on various things like that. And why is this the case?
Well, I'll be honest and say that I really think it comes from both sides. I think Republicans are pretty horrible about Hillary Clinton. I mean, I think the insults go beyond just her positions on issues. I think she gets a lot of really unfair attacks about her looks. And, one of the things that I cite in this article was the Huffington Post was all upset because there was these buttons being distributed at some Republican event, and they were basically, it was a crude sexual joke about Hillary Clinton. So I think my view is just that women in general get attacked in a sexual way that men don't. And I think men do get criticized, like, when they deserve it, like Anthony Weiner. I mean, the jokes won't stop about him, but I'm sorry, he asked for it, He set himself up for it. But some of these women, like Michelle Bachmann or even Hillary Clinton, are being attacked in the same sort of gross sexual way for absolutely no reason other than the fact that they're women and that it's just sort of the nature of things in America. And so, I've heard some pretty nasty things about Speaker Pelosi. I guess she's not Speaker anymore, but former Speaker Pelosi. But again, there's no outcry in the media when it happens to women on the right. And that's, to me, the crux of the problem.
Right. No, I and you're right on those 2 points, by the way, and that's wrong. I mean, when you go to an event, you see some of these bumper stickers and things, and it's done in both parties. Some of it's like really uncalled for, and it really has no place at these events. But are you finding that a lot of these attacks are coming from the mainstream media or just talk radio, other forms of media?
Both. Like, one of the. So what's her name? Laura Ingraham was famously attacked by Bill Maher, who, he's a media guy, and he's a jerk. And he called her a slut, I think. Same thing that Rush Limbaugh, whatever it was either the same thing or very similar to what Rush Limbaugh called Sandra Fluke. And it was because that was his response to some political point that she'd made. But nobody cared. Like, one person on the left cared, and I think it was Kirsten Powers. But Rush Limbaugh does that to Sandra Fluke, who's far less prominent than Laura Ingraham in terms of being out there as a political voice on the right. And it was like the end of the world. And, as you said, President Obama called her to apologize, like some great woe had happened against all of womankind. But, in fact, the very position she was standing for is not supported by the majority of women. So, I think it's probably less coming from actual politicians insulting women and more from sort of figures in the media, whether it's radio or television. That's just sort of my... But, I saw a horrific article that Kirsten Powers also attacked in the Daily Caller about the new woman who's on the left for the new lineup for Crossfire. I forget her name. She was in the Obama administration. And it was a really crass article down of this woman, the kind of thing that you just wouldn't see about a man. So I do think it comes from both sides. I think it comes mostly from TV, radio, and some journalists.
You know, Ashley, one of the things that I think is really sad here is when you go back, you look at, you know, maybe your grandparents or my great-grandparents, you look at the women's suffrage movement, you look at what they actually went through until the 19th Amendment finally gave women the right to vote, and then you kind of fast forward and you look at the marginalization, forget the objectification, you look at the marginalization that women in many cases do to themselves. You know, you can have intelligent debates over whether or not the opinions of Hillary Clinton are good or bad, are ill-intentioned for the country or not, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you know, I think a lot of this is actually an empowerment of women. If women allow, let me give you an example, that if women allow, especially, let's say, Democratic women or liberal women, if they allow conservatives to be attacked because they don't like their policies, but they allow them to be attacked and dragged through the gutter simply because their right to participate in this great democracy is somehow inappropriate or not welcome because they don't agree with the left's narrative, then they're open to be attacked, then they really don't have a right. And you could say the same when it happens from a conservative perspective, but then they don't really have a right to complain when somebody's doing it to them. And women are fully 50%. So while I think there's plenty of guys who are guilty here, I would say women need to be empowered to say no more. Judge us, you know, just like Martin Luther King said, right? Judge us by the content of our character. Forget what we wear. Forget how we look. Focus on what we are doing, and if women stand up for themselves, then I think it'll be a lot easier for men to be more respectful and less crass as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that the real burden in this situation falls on interest groups on the left, because I think that they will not defend women on the right. I think in general, I think that for them, this sort of war on women talking point works really well to advance their agenda. So they kind of let it blow over when it happens the other way. But I completely agree. I don't think this is just men attacking women. I think that women in certain women's interest groups don't have women's interests at the forefront of their agenda.
You know, just this morning I was reading an article about the Saudis. You know, this is, of course, we're going to a bit of an extreme here, but, you know, the Saudis are now warning women against the driving ban because you have a lot of people, you know, they're having their own little suffrage movement. Of course, they're not exactly as free as we were to protest, you know, just for the simple act of being able to drive a car. Now, I would make the case the only reason Saudi women shouldn't be able to drive a car is because I couldn't imagine anybody, man or woman, or even a race car driver, driving safely in a burqa. But I point that out as sort of an extreme because you bring up this thing about the war on women. There is a real war on women going on all over the world. And if anything, American women really need to sort of stand up as a collective body to go even beyond our borders to say, you know, empowering women, the best way to reduce, problems worldwide is to make sure women are educated and are equally participating in the societies. Because you look at all those societies where that happens, we are far more prosperous and better and better culture.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think I'm forgetting her name. Christina Hoff Sommers just wrote an article to that effect for The Atlantic, saying that the one thing that should unite women on both sides of the aisle in this country is the fact that the real fight for feminism lies outside of our borders, where you have places like India where women are being horrifically gang raped, or like you mentioned, Saudi Arabia, where women have virtually no rights, and that should be sort of a common ground for women in the United States. And I agree. As somebody who's personally pro-life, I think that this actually needs to start all the way with life, because you have people on both sides of the aisle realizing that around the world, gender-selective abortion targets women, in places like China and India especially. And in our own country, we can't even pass a ban on gender-selective abortion in Congress. And I'll point out that it was an interest group on the left that stopped that from happening. So I do agree that we should be thankful as women in the United States for what we do have, and that there are places where the gender disparities truly are, not something over, the wage war like we have here, which is very technical and relates a lot more to women working part-time, things like that, but places where women literally can be fired from a job for being a woman or raped on the job and not receive justice.
Yeah, those are excellent points, by the way. In just a couple of minutes that we have left, I just wanted to get your sense of we're going to start the conversation off, and in some regards, I guess Hillary Clinton has been campaigning. Well, I don't think she ever stopped thinking about running for office in 2016. But what kind do you think she'll be treated fairly, taking the sexuality out of it during a campaign if she was running against a man on the GOP side, or in another scenario, what if two women were running, one for each party, as the main candidates for the office of presidency? How do you think that would go, and do you think that the media would treat both sides the same?
Well, I think if Hillary Clinton were to run against a man, which I think is a very highly likely scenario, she would actually have an advantage being a woman, because I think, again, the left does such a good job of pulling this war on women, you're a misogynist, anytime a man opens his mouth, especially if he's a man talking about quote-unquote women's issues like abortion, things like that. So I think that would work to her favor, and the left is clearly shameless about any time. I mean, they just throw it out there, and it, changes the polls. So I think she would have an advantage in that regard. I think I look forward to the day when two women run against each other, because then I think it will really force people to realize that women in America are not a mindless voting bloc, that you have women who prefer low taxes and you have women who prefer high taxes. You have women who are pro-life, you have women who are not. And it will really, I guess I'd love to get away from the so-called woman vote, and I think having two women run against each other would really force America to realize there's no such thing, that women have very sort of diverse ideological views. But I don't know, maybe that day's coming soon, but I think it looks pretty plausible that the next election will be Hillary Clinton versus insert name of Republican male.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's funny, I always thought it would have been interesting had Herman Cain been able to come out through the primaries as the victor, because, conservative black against, I guess ultra-liberal black men. Race, well, I guess for most of us who value common sense, race wouldn't be a part of the issue anymore. But it definitely would have been interesting. And, it's funny because when I look at the bench of the in the GOP, there are a fair amount of women, congresswomen, even senators, who I think are excellent and do a good job. But they really don't have the name recognition as a lot of, when you've, the first names that pop in your head, and right or wrong, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, a handful, Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal, a handful of governors, things like that. But I can't think of too many women outside of Michelle Bachmann or Palin that really jump into the forefront there.
I think some names to watch would be Senator Ayotte. I think she's, and I think what Republicans did wrong with McCain was they picked Sarah Palin because they thought, oh, here's a feisty woman. This is going to, be a game changer. Well, it wasn't, because Sarah Palin didn't really have the mental chops for it. But I think some of these women like Ayotte she is a smart, serious lady. Another one I think is Susana Martinez of New Mexico. And then, what's her name, Haley Barber? No, Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley,
yes.
Yeah, she's great. She was really, I thought she just shone at the GOP convention. for Mitt Romney, and I'm trying to think of a few others. I mean, but it is true. I think there's only. Yeah. Is it possible that there's only one? No, there's Susan Collins too, but she's not too conservative.
I agree with you on Kelly Ayotte and Nikki Haley. I think the problem with Susan Martinez is the fact that she, like the issue I had with Sarah Palin, is she comes from a small state, and I think there's a big difference between running a small state and people who come from the bigger states that are really primed to be able to take on the task of being president. I think there's a huge difference. So
yeah,
that's
I think that's
my thoughts.
That's right.
Anyway, Ashley, it's been great having you, and hope you'll join us again. We'll keep following you, of course, and if you can give the website so people could check out the other work and the other people there at Acculturated, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. It's www.acculturated, ACCULTURATED.com.
Excellent. Again, Ashley McGuire with Acculturated. Thank you so much. Her article, by the way, is entitled The Real Sexual Double Standard, and we'll post that on our site as well. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take care.